Hello and welcome to episode 1 of An Actual Magician Explains. Yes, I am an actual magician. In this first episode, I'm going to be explaining how does magic work, or not so much how does magic work in this first video, but more how do you make a spell work? Do spells actually work? Can you do a magical spell to get something? What sort of spells can you do? What do you need to make a spell work? Have I ever done any spells that have worked? The usual sorts of questions that as an actual magician, yes, I am an actual magician, gets asked a lot. And in this video, I wanted to explain the 3 main components of how a spell actually works, or how you can get a spell to work in a practical sense. Because over the last 45 years, I've experimented with ceremonial magic, with Golden Dawn magic, thelemic magic based on the work of Aleister Crowley. I've read Aleister Crowley's original notebooks and noted all of the jottings in the side where he was talking about something called energized enthusiasm, which we will return to in this video. And over the years, I've worked candle magic and all sorts of styles and types of magic, chaos magic and so forth, in order to really experiment with what works. And there are 3 important components that I think I would like us to look at today. And those are intent, indifference, and interconnection. And we can remember these if we think of the tarot cards, that I would correspond with these because everything is tarot or can be illustrated by tarot. And intent is the magician, corresponds to the magician. Indifference would correspond to the hermit, and interconnection would correspond to the high priestess. So we have the magician, the high priestess, and the hermit to remind us of these 3 components. And in a sense, they're all cards that are a type of magic in and of themselves. Now, in simple terms, intent is your purpose before doing the ritual. Indifference is your state during the ritual or the spell, whichever methodology you adopt. And interconnection is your action after you have cast the spell out. And so I want to talk about these things very specifically, and in future videos we'll be talking more about spellcraft and spell work and all sorts of magic as well. And towards the end of this video, I'd like to give a demonstration that I did yesterday or the day before, after I first of all scripted this video and decided what I was going to talk about. And I wanted to give a demonstration of how to make a spell work. And I actually made a little mini spell work, and it worked perfectly well for what I was intending as a demonstration. And I'd like to show you that towards the end of this video. Now, this teaching will work for whatever form of magic you personally practice or are looking to practice. And we do have a spellcrafting course and a candle magic course utilizing some of these principles in Magick School, where I run courses at, and I will link that in the description below if you're interested in following up, shortcutting some of the practicalities that I'm going to be talking about. Now, this is unscripted, so I tried to script it, but my mind just doesn't work to a script, so unfortunately I'm going to be a little bit ad hoc with this, but I do hope that we will cover these 3 main components. So I think the overall message of this is magic teaches us that the world is not what it appears to be. Time doesn't work in the way it appears to be. Our sense of reality and ourselves is not what it appears to be. And as a result of that, and as a result of interacting with that through divination, whether that's tarot, the I Ching, astrology, runes, whatever your form of divination might be, it teaches us as well with ceremony and magical work that the universe is basically a doing engine and we are a meaning engine. So the universe does and we give meaning to it. In fact, one tentative definition of magic I have is that it is the art of navigating reality through the science of correspondence. The art of navigating reality through the science of correspondence is both an art and a science, as Crowley had it, the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with will. And what happens, it appears, from my experimentation anyway, is that we always get it the wrong way round. It's like we think the universe might have some great plan or meaning and we go about doing things. But in fact, the reality is the other way around, that the universe does things and we are the ones who give meaning and shape and reality and value to it. And so most of the implication of that and through magical work is that the art and science of magic is getting out of the way of the universe, but also navigating our way into a reality that we have negotiated and communicated through our interconnection with the universe itself. In effect, as Kirk said about magnetism, the world is bound by invisible knots, and through magic we are teasing, testing, pulling, shaping, being shaped by the invisible knots, and therefore everything has consequence as well. So let's start off with intent. Now, intent is our purpose for doing a spell. So that could be a spell to do with money, it could be a spell to do with relationships or with employment, all of the things that people ask about with divination, but here we're taking a more active approach to it, that we are now going to try and change that. And quite often divination and ritual work can work very well hand in hand, which is what my book Terosophy is all about. The way that we can then make our communication with the universe not just a one-way divination of what is the universe up to, but feed back into that process through the cards themselves, through tarot themselves as a magical object. Now, for all of the magic that I'm going to talk about and for making spells work, these three components of intent, indifference, and interconnection, we've got magic and all of the tools in our hands. We don't need a fancy temple, a fancy ceremony to call on the right deities, the gods, the goddesses, the right spirits, the right angels, and demons or devils, whatever it might be that you want to work with. Because we already have our pentacle of earth in our hand, we have our cup in our hand, we have our knife in our hand, and we have our wand in our hand as well. We have all of the elements we need to hand in our own body, so we can do embodied magic as well. So, intent then. Now, one of the main things with intent is, first of all, you have to be really clear as to the intent of your spell. What do you want to have happen? Now, my finding is that it is far better to do a specific request for an outcome without necessarily being specifically intent and defined about how you want that outcome to happen, which we'll come on to in a bit. In effect, rather than, for example, if you were in debt and thought to do a money spell, it's far better to do a spell, for example, to Jupiter. We might invoke the largesse and expansion and sort of Jupiterian forces for a money spell, but we would do that to resolve our debt issue within a certain amount of time and be specific about that, like within a year or something along those lines. And then allow the force and the energy that we have invoked to find the best way of resolving that issue to your intent without defining it straight down to it's got to be money. I need money for this debt issue. It might be able to come through in some other way, and therefore we have to find the art of making our intent both specific and open enough, flexible enough for the universe to have a better communication of how that's going to arise. So intent is very important, and we also have to want that intent and be aware of the consequences that might happen if we cast a spell totally focused on that singular intent. Spells can be undone afterwards, but it takes an awful lot of effort, and it can be very messy, and a lot of damage can have been done by the spell actually working before you try and unpick it and undo it, and that requires a lot of energy as well. So intent has to be fairly clean, fairly tidy, fairly direct, but also flexible as well, which we'll come on to when we talk about the High Priestess and Interconnection. Now, the second component, so intent is our first component. Without intent, magic may or may not work, but it's gambling, basically. It's more down to synchronicity, luck, or the right force at the right time, as opposed to your actual intent. And my magical teacher once, and my first magical teacher once said to me, if you do a spell for £10 and the following day, or $10, or 10 of your local currency, and the following day you get 20 of your local currency, does that mean that the spell has worked, has partially worked, or has not worked at all? How different is the result to your intent for you to actually know that the spell has worked? So that's an interesting question to ask yourself. How do you know, how will you know that the spell has actually worked? And we'll come on to that when I look at the example of the spell that I did for this video and this explainer. Now, the second thing is probably the most important critical thing, and it's something that Aleister Crowley called energized enthusiasm, and Austin Osman Spare, the artist magician, called the neither state. And it is a sort of magical state of awareness or consciousness that you have to be in, I believe, for the best result, the most effective use of magic. And it is a state that I call indifference, but it is a state that is both 100% committed to what you want, and also totally unambiguously disassociated and unattached from the outcome at the same time. And this is the state that is most difficult to achieve, I think, and this is the state that ritual is there to help generate by putting you in a symbolic headspace through meditation, through sex magic, through ceremonial magic, through chaos magic, through focused candle magic, whatever it might be. It's partially to help generate this state of indifference. You have to want it and simultaneously not want it. And this is why we're not all walking around being able to cast a spell sort of like left, right and center, and everyone is casting a magic spell all of the time for whatever they want, and it's working all of the time. We'd live in a very different universe, I imagine, and you can imagine what sort of universe that would be if magic worked for everyone all of the time. It would be a very, very complex and confusing universe. It's certainly not the one we appear to be in. So generating that state of indifference is the most difficult, sometimes the easiest, the trickiest. It's part of the art of making magic work as opposed to the actual rigorous science of it through correspondence. Now, the final thing that has to be present, I think, for a spell to be very effective is interconnection, which is like earthing, like channeling, but I think wider. I liken it to the difference between fishing. Like if you fish with a fishing rod, you cast your rod, it's one rod, one line, one bait in one location. And that sits there and you may or may not catch a fish. Whereas interconnection to me is more like having a massive fishing net. The bigger the fishing net, if you control the whole lake in one go with a net, you're going to catch everything that's in there. And so with interconnection, this is what happens maybe leading up to the spell, but certainly after the spell, that you have to totally forget about the spell to fulfill component number 2 of the sacred indifference, the wise foolishness, the deliberate empty-headedness of that state, but also you have to allow enough lightning rods, earthing points, that the spell can actually shape itself and manifest in the world around you. It is better to give an example. So if you did an employment spell, then not only should you then start looking for jobs and actually applying for jobs, but again, in that neither state, which is why it's so difficult to maintain and make a spell work, you have to both, and that might be enough. It might be enough just to start applying for jobs. It might be possible that the spell will work even if you don't apply for a job. Someone will just come and offer you one. Now, this is because interconnection is probably the third and the least essential of the 3 essentials, but I think it is partially essential at least, because it helps shape the spell and that helps your intent and it helps your indifferent state as well. But not only should you be applying for jobs, you should also be watching videos about the sort of work that you would want or that you enjoy or that you have done. You should be going to visits to places that do that sort of work, that you should be reading magazine articles about it, that you should be looking at YouTube videos about it, and so on and so on, that you cast your net, this interconnection, and you vibrate the visible knots that connect the universe in as many places as possible. It's a little bit like when someone says, well, to make magic work, you have to have the right correspondences. Like if you're doing a so-called love spell or relationship spell, then if that was to Venus, you would say want 7 candles. They could be pink candles. You would want particular fragrances. You would want pink petals. You would want 7-shaped heptagram or whatever, and so on and so on and so on. You would want a certain type of music playing, and so forth. And that is important, and it is important if you're working through correspondence, but it's far more important to have all of those correspondences in reality in your everyday life. For example, being in the right places at the right times as many times as possible, places where you might find a new relationship, and the more places the better after the ritual, as opposed to just focusing it all within the ritual itself. So these are the 3 things: intent, indifference, and interconnection, that I think make a spell work. Now, also secrecy, keeping the spell silent. I wrote this one down. This is part of the sort of 14-page script I originally wrote for this, and then decided I just cannot do recordings to a script at the moment. But in Shakespeare wrote in The Tempest, "Sweet now silence, Juno and Ceres whisper seriously, something else to do, hush and be mute, or else our spell is marred." Basically, we have to keep silent about the work, the magic, even inside ourselves, in order not to get in the way of the universe once we have cast our particular spell. Now, in order to follow the modus operandi of the actual magician's videos, I wanted to do an actual magical spell, and I've done spells in temples, I've done spells in caves, I've done spells at stone circles, I've done spells on the astral and so forth. And so I wanted a spell that I could cast to demonstrate that magic actually works using these principles. I didn't have a particular spell in mind, and I decided this a couple of days ago when I'd finished scripting the original script for this video, which I decided to do unscripted. Now, yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and I'll try and put up, if my video editing skills are improving, I should be able to put up a video of my phone, hopefully without my bank details on it. And 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, bang awake. I'd gone to sleep relatively early. I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning, yesterday or the day before, having decided to do a magical spell in order to go along with the video. And I just had this idea that I should look at my phone. So I looked at my phone, I scrolled through the socials and so forth for a few minutes, and then I felt compelled almost to look through the apps and I don't know, find something to do before I went back to sleep. Wasn't quite sure. But I went through the apps and I suddenly remembered that I have a UK National Lottery app that I barely use. And I think it's got, well, I know because I went into it, it had 50 pence in 50 pence just left in from a previous play on the lottery. I decided, right, okay, well, what I could do is a quick money spell, and then I could play a lottery game and demonstrate whether this works or not. And I guess in the back of my head, I was thinking, if it doesn't work, then I don't need to do to even include a mention of doing a spell in the video. I can get away with doing a video talking about magic without necessarily demonstrating it or talking about all of the other times that I have had magic work. For example, the 13 dancing girls on a Wednesday, which I'll come back to in a later video, no doubt. So I placed £10 into the app. I chose the first game that it suggested to me, which was a game that cost £1 to play each time, with a cash value reward ranging up to 100,000 or 10,000 pounds. And I lost the first couple, and I thought, well, I've chosen to do this. This is where this demonstration has led me, so I will keep playing. And I played eventually until I'd gained £20, and I felt intuitively that that was the result of the spell, which was to demonstrate that magic does work, that you can do a money spell, and it works. And so I cut my losses at £20 and I withdrew the £20, and so within 10 or 15 minutes of doing the spell, I had doubled my £10 into £20 through a game of chance, through gambling. Now, again, I don't necessarily condone gambling. and I don't necessarily think it's the best way to make a money spell work, but for the purposes of this demonstration, it was certainly what actually occurred, and I wanted a demonstration that I could prove that I had conducted a spell, that I had then had a result for that spell, and this particular event satisfied the intent, the nature of indifference and the nature of interconnection, just to demonstrate that. Now, that would possibly make it a lot harder for me to do the same spell again for the same result. If I was to do a money spell to win the lottery, again, that is perhaps too much of an intent, is too limiting, and also is very hard to be indifferent about it. You either totally forget that you ever did it, or you're constantly obsessing about what you would do if you became a millionaire, and so it's very difficult to get the neither state for it. And again, in terms of the interconnection, it's only down one avenue as well, and this is why simple money spells are so difficult to actually make work. Not impossible by a long way. My first ever spell was waving a coin at the moon, 4 lines of a little ditty, a little rhyming poem, and the following day my father said to me that he had taken my granddad, given him a lift back from a bus station or something, or he'd taken him a long distance and had come back that night after I'd gone to bed, and that my granddad had given him £5 for the petrol, and my dad didn't want to accept it. So in the end, my dad said, "Well, I'll accept it, but I'll give it to Marcus." And so I was stood there first thing in the morning at breakfast holding £5, having waved a coin at the moon the night before, because my dad was out and I could go and wave this coin and say this little poem, stood outside the house. And so you can imagine that that had quite an impact. But the interesting thing with that is not that I suddenly thought magic worked, because I sort of knew that it did almost instinctively, which is why I was doing the spell in the first place, from a book that I got through mail order. But my first thought wasn't, oh, magic works, spells work, you can make a spell work, this is really interesting. My first thought was, why didn't I wave a bigger coin at the moon? And I think that does speak to some of the interesting thinking that we have around spells, our desires and our intent as well. Okay, so I hope that that has given you something to think about in terms of considering spells, magic, getting spells to work in the future. And if you want a shortcut to actually spell crafting and a simple form of magic using candle magic, then I have a couple of courses already set up for that within our Magick school, which I will link again below in the description here. So that is intent, sacred indifference, and interconnection are the 3 main things I believe that you need to make a spell work. And I will bid you farewell until the next video, and we will be looking at another aspect of Western Esotericism, particularly to do with Kabbalah and the initiatory system, and the way that Kabbalah maps the system, particularly as I teach it. So thank you for bearing with me in the video, and I will bid you farewell in the way that we bid our members of our private magical order, which is the worker is hidden in the workshop. Thank you. Bye for now.